Record.
And the first order of business is our roll call. Larry, you want to kick us off?
Larry here.
Kenneth here.
Tracy here. So sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Ken Halliday here. And now we'll go to the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madison, I always love how you put up a flag for me on my screen.
Okay.
Always the
Rather
same.
than me just-
Yes.
Thank you, guys. So everybody has had a chance to see the agenda. Are there any comments or additions or changes to the agenda? If not, I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda.
I motion to approve the agenda.
Second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item is just, are there any declarations of conflicts of interest that we need to talk about tonight as it relates to tonight's the agenda?
I'm sorry, Ken, but I do need a motion for the minutes.
Oh, I went right past that. Thank you, Madison, for catching me on that. Also in the packet was the minutes from our last meeting on March 19th. Everyone has had a chance to take a look at that. The same inquiry here. Are there any changes or modifications to the minutes? If not, I'm looking for a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion to approve minutes.
Second that.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the motion carries. Now, back to where I was headed was, there any declarations of conflicts that we need to talk about, conflicts of interest tonight, as it relates to tonight's agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. We have a couple of folks here. Do we have any public comments at this point?
That would be us.
there'll be-
Anything not on the agenda?
Yeah, there'll be opportunities for public comment as we get into the discussion, but are there any opening comments that anybody would like to make?
I have no one online.
Okay, anybody there indicating they'd like to speak right now?
No, sir.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Did we receive the letter from Pete Seibert that he had sent?
I will be reading that into the public comment.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Larry.
I guess she'll tell us about that at some point.
Here,
Um,
I will read it into the public comment right now.
Okay. And who's this gentleman?
This is Pete Seibert. He submitted public comment to Minturn Town Council and Historic Preservation Commission. As you may know, I currently have 3 properties listed for sale in the 100 block, 101 Main, 155 Main, and 192 Main. I also participated in the sale of 155 Main Street in the past year. Over the past year, I have spent time explaining the ordinance to prospective buyers, the goal being to make them aware of its existence and refer them to Madison with specific questions. In the course of those discussions, the following issues have come to light. The primary issue is uncertainty surrounding the historic designation, starting with telling the buyer that the property in question may be considered historic. In order to move forward, the buyer must put the property under contract, depositing earnest money, then spend money with an architect in order to have plans to present to DRB, potentially starting the historical preservation process, all without knowing the outcome. There is the prospect of a building being designated historic in spite of it being past its structural life. And the size of the existing structure may not allow for a functional commercial use or allow for the addition of second floor residential space. The concept of historical preservation is valuable and Minturn has a character that is the direct result of its history. There should be a way to make the process more certain for potential new owners and meet the goal of historic preservation. One thought I've heard is to promote design incorporating the style and/or actual components of the original building. I applaud the establishment of the Historic Preservation Commission and look forward to seeing the results we all want. Thank you for your consideration, Pete.
Okay, great. I suppose we can, as we get into the items, including 151, I can't remember which one he has, 151 or 155, we can touch on this versus discussing it right now. Is that right, Madison?
Certainly, if you would like.
Okay. Or do we get into this now? Just as a matter
Yeah.
of,
We don't discuss during public comment, so any
Right.
discussion would have to take place during the business item.
okay, good. That's what I was heading towards. Okay, so we'll hold our questions for now. And we'll go to the next. Are there no other public comments at this time?
No other public comments.
Okay, so we'll go to special presentations, our next agenda item, which we have none, correct?
That is correct.
And that leads us right into the business items, which we have two, 151 Main, that nomination, as well as 155 Main, and that nomination. And so why don't we turn it over to you guys, Madison and Michelle, to open up this discussion.
Yeah, of course. So first business item on the agenda is 151 Main. This is a town-initiated nomination application. Staff found of the 5 different eligibility criteria, the structure fits within 3. 1, connection with persons significant in history. 2, distinctive characteristics of a type, period, method of construction or artisan. And 3, geographic importance. 151 Main reflects the late Victorian style of architecture, specifically folk Victorian and minimal traditional, that was constructed in North America in the early to mid 20th century. Traditional minimal became extremely popular just before and post World War II, which is why I said it was a mix, as traditional minimal evolved to make relatively simple houses out of materials that were readily available. And as the railroads expanded, factory-made building parts could be sent to far corners of the continents. This is an iconic structure with its twins sitting next door. They are one of the first buildings one sees as they drive into the heart of Minturn. They represent a time when Minturn used to be ranches and farmland, as the people who built these houses ran cattle, sheep, a dairy farm, and lettuce fields that contributed to Minturn being called the lettuce capital of the United States for a brief time. They have since been co-opted into commercial stores rather than residences and continue to contribute to the character of the town. There was public outcry at the potential of this building being torn down, with a packed council room filled with community members. This structure represents a transitional period of Minturn's history, where Minturn recently incorporated as one of the oldest towns in Eagle County. 151 Main Street is a lot that's in the middle of the town's commercial core. This building is a familiar sight to anyone who comes here or lives here. The Nelsons were an institution for Minturn, with Mr. Ben Nelson running the Nelson Dairy and Mr. Peter Nelson running the Nelson Ranch, started in 1888. According to Minturn Memoir, Pete Nelson homesteaded the ranch at the foot of Meadow Mountain, where the Forest Service complex was built in the late 1980s. The Nelsons owned all the land that was later known as Malloy Park, which they later sold to New Jersey Zinc Co. But in the 30s, they used all this land and all of the Cross Creek area for pasture and winter feeding. The Nelsons trucked lettuce to Denver weekly for several years, contributing, as I said, to the unofficial title of lettuce capital of the country for Minturn. When we notified the property owner, the response did not indicate opposition to the application, but the property owner is here tonight if he would like to speak. So that is my presentation.
And Madison, do we offer that opportunity now, or do we discuss and then bring in comment? What's the process here? This is our first one.
You can ask me any questions you have on my staff report right now, and then we can open it up to public comment.
Okay, great. All right, just want to make sure Marco will have a chance to address any comments. All right, well, let's open it up for discussion. And Larry, Tracy, Kenneth.
Hi. First of all, that was beautifully written. I appreciate the verbiage that you put in there, and then we're able to tie all the different components of historical preservation and the story. Secondly, could you just elaborate a little bit when I think I know, but just for the record, when you said something about, the packed house, could you maybe just elaborate on that event and the maybe the circumstances behind that, just for me? Thanks.
So a couple of years ago, when the structure was owned by a different person, there was the potential of putting something on the back of the lot and maybe having to either move if they were going to affect the structure, possibly moving the structure. And we had quite a full house at the planning commission hearing and the town council hearing for, actually, I think it was 2 planning commission hearings instead of a town council. But we had a packed room of people coming out saying, hey, we don't want this building to go anywhere. And that kind of helped kickstart the town's historic preservation efforts and creating, a committee in order to go through crafting chapter 19 for historic preservation.
Was that was fairly recent memory, right? When then,
It was within the last 2 or 3
okay,
years.
yeah, I just want to make sure I get my time frame straight. Thank you.
I would add too, because you're just saying, just for the record, I think that a lot of folks were there, not just worried about it being moved, but worried about it being demolished. Obviously, there was no pending permit or anything like that, but there was concern about that, there wasn't enough space on the back and they may have to demo the building. So I would just add that point. Kenneth, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, as Tracy said, awesome to see a nice full application. Being that this is our first private property, our residential commercial property. Before we had the saloon that was operating, we had the water tower. So I guess my questions are around, is this the expectation? Obviously we know we were created at the behest of town council's move to want to protect these properties, right? And we're relating back to what I believe to be still some timeline not long after the Mountain Peddler situation, right? That was a catalyst for a lot of this, or was that before that? So I'm just trying to understand timing of that, and should homeowners expect that within, proximity or within the 75-year designation that the town is going to be putting these applications for? Because I think that's what I was expecting maybe we'd see a homeowner putting it first. So that's why or a property owner putting it up first. So that's something I'm not seeing. So I just wanted, yeah.
Thank you for the question. I think that brings to light probably a greater discussion, but for the purposes of this conversation, given all of the effort that it took to put Chapter 19 together, lawyers, committees, multiple public discussions and hearings, it was anticipated that more historic preservation efforts would have been implemented at this point. And there was some surprise that there were not more nominations coming from the public and this leadership body specifically. And so with that, to move historic preservation efforts in the town of Minturn forward, staff said, let's start nominating. And that was specifically my effort Madison made all this up. Yeah, but that was my direction. And so knowing the outcry that we saw, like you said, with the demolition of the Mountain Peddler building, which for the record was totally done through the proper channels. There was no historic preservation chapter at that point to limit the ability for a property owner to demolish what they wish at that time. And then, like Ken identified, the concern about this next, what could be considered and is identified in this application as iconic building in town as potentially being demolished, led to the outcries that we saw in this chamber from the public. And so with that, staff wanted to move forward with what seemed, and I say that because it's up to this leadership body and the council, but what seemed like an obvious choice, for lack of a better word, for historic preservation. We tried to imagine if this were to come forward with, as a demolition permit, and how that would be received by the public. So
Yeah.
our goal was to have as little of a controversy in an application as possible, but still start to move Minturns Historic Preservation Program forward. And that's how this came before you this evening. We are certainly hopeful that more private property owners will bring forward their own structures, and we are hopeful that this body will bring forward more nominations as well. That's to the discretion of this leadership body. But in the meantime, this seemed like a logical next step in the progression of the program.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that clarity. And my question wasn't out of critique by any means or anything, but I think that was something not long after we started and before we had the application for the water tower. And I think other people spoke about, like, is it within our body to nominate that? And I think some ways it felt like it was, in some ways it didn't feel like it was. I think there's always been the concern as we we've been excited to hear from Pueblo and the research that's done that there isn't a real nexus to loss of property value by putting something in historic preservation. Like, I feel that's a very positive momentum for us. So I just want to, as we continue through this, for people, if that's the expectation, well, then that might be just something that people would need to understand and maybe have an opportunity to voice. And maybe there's a workshop opportunity for us to kind of discuss some of this coming down as well. But I think the big sensitive piece for people is how this affects their ability to, make their own decisions on their property, right? And so that's what I want to make sure that, like, I don't own property here, so I'm going to base what I know off of living here and what I am feeling and hearing and what town council has said for us to do. So this certainly does follow through with what council established by saying, yes, this is an entity that we want to be doing this, right? So I think we're here now where we hadn't been here. So I think it'll be exciting to see how this process goes, and I'm excited to see nominations in front of us in any format, because that's something that's been frustrating, I would say, for myself. Like, okay, we're at these meetings, how are we moving the needle? And awesome for Madison to keep us on task with kind of cleaning up the pieces of the puzzle, whether it's getting us together with getting certified local government, which has opened up so much. So, like, so much that's been gained here, and I just want us to keep that positivity forward through what we may hear. And I may be just speculating, everybody's awesome and stoked about it, but I think there's still some room for us to continue to navigate people's feelings and what they want out of this. So thank you for that.
Larry?
My recollection was that this body had determined we would not preemptively select properties to be designated or nominated as historic and allow the process to unfold naturally. I think it has been a disappointment that not a lot of properties have come before us. And actually, I think it was back in November, I opted to eat crow on my opposition and have Helen's House be nominated, because for Jane and I, we felt like it was worthwhile preserving the old structure, and we thought it might give a boost to have at least Helen's House be a part of it. The process of doing it for someone like me, it was a bit arduous, so my application was not complete. And Madison's application was very complete and was very nice. However, my point of view and concern, and why I was chosen by council to sit on this board, because I made no bones about it, that I have more concern about economic viability. And in particular, when we look at the Minturn Community Plan, that viability is essential. Sales tax revenue for this town is essential. And we are facing a lot of rapid growth. And I believe that the the property owners that will be moving in and the existing property owners look for value in their community beyond just an aesthetic. We all know that the homes are cute and charming, but there is an economic impact when designating a historic property. And that comes to play when you are an investor and you're looking at spending money to build something out, and the cost of it is prohibitive and is no longer viable. So right now, I live on the 100 block, I work on the 100 block, and I see 5 empty buildings. And it's alarming to me. And I asked the mayor the other day, I asked him to come talk with me because I know I can be reactionary, I can be emotional and not very level-headed. And I think that Earl's very level-headed. And so I expressed my concerns about economic viability. And when I look at the Bellum House, it was a real eye-opener to me that, I mean, it's a very historical property, but it sits on 3 streets between the river and Main Street, much like Helen's house, only it has a 3rd street. The economic viability of that property needs to be, the house needs to be torn down. It needs to be built with residential above it to support the commercial below. And our experts that came out and shared with us, you can't have strictly commercial. It doesn't add up. The numbers aren't there. You have to have residential to support the commercial. And these are coming from experts, not from me. So I get concerned for our community that if we're sitting on 5 empty buildings and the historic preservation nomination impedes economic viability for the individual, it is absolutely going to impact the economic viability of our community. So I know you guys have heard me say this before, so I feel like it's my responsibility to echo my concerns today. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Larry. I'd like to, was there something you want to say, Tracy or Kenneth, right now?
Sure, I'm just, thank you for voicing
hard
that,
on
and
Zoom.
you have a business and you have, much more expertise. I mean, are we actually speaking in, it's actually is impacting, or we think it will, or we're concerned or afraid? Like, that's where I would like to kind of clarify, is that kind of an opinion that it could? Or, I mean, can we say that it is impacting economic viability? That's my question. I mean, I understand that the concern, but I'm wondering, and not to be at all rude or take away what you said, but I'm not sure that that's what we're seeing, or why there's, I don't know if that's why there's 5 empty buildings.
I
The real
agree.
reason.
And I would ask the same question of when we talk about what were the words that were used of the people that came out in opposition to the building being torn down? You can fill this room with 30 people in a heartbeat, and it's not a very big percentage. It's about 10% of the people that vote in this town, and that's about 30% of the people who live in this town. So I don't know that it really echoes a full picture. And when it comes to viability, Jane and I purchased 156 Main Street, and we have toyed with so many different numbers on how to make it viable, to make something commercial below, residential above, contemplated what kind of retail business could go in there and have it make sense. We've contemplated maximizing the lot square footage and building out to put a lodge in. And quite frankly, it just doesn't pencil out. At least for me, I'm turning 59 this summer. I don't think I'm going to see a return on investment, maybe my children. And so when it comes to like Helen's house, the way that it's working, it's kind of breaking even. We put a pretty chunk of change into that property in 2018. And I'm currently living in it and renting out bedrooms, trying to make economic viability. You know, we have the Agora out there. It's hard to make ends meet. And when you have more complex issues that come up to create a business that's productively enterprising, you create more problems. And we have a businessman here who has multiple businesses, and he is the owner of 151 Main Street. I'm sure he has an opinion on viability on the economics. But it takes money to make money. And when the Bellum House, which is listed at 2.4 million, if you just ponder who would buy it and for what, and how could they get a return on it, it doesn't take too much penciling to realize that it's going to be a challenge. That's all. That's my answer to that.
It's very interesting to me that economic viability is also attached to extremely escalating property values. And I just have to say it. I mean, we're sitting here with a property that's not going to sell at that price. I don't see it happening. I don't think anybody sees it selling at that price. So we're not even looking at the scope of the reality of what's happened to Minturn, is that it's speculated beyond what it returns to the residents. There's not commercial. Why would you pay that if you couldn't operate a business, if there wasn't enough for you to do, right? We don't have a barber right downtown. We've got our nice guy down the street, but like, this has become economically unviable, and not because of what people can or can't do with the properties. It's the reality is that it's a runaway train. So it's gonna be 5 million, it's just 10 million. What's gonna get people in to Minturn to want to live here, to start families here, to allow this to grow? Because it's the whole kit and caboodle. It's not just this one property. I mean, that's the alarm for me, is that I don't know how you'd operate any business paying that out. I don't know, you'd have to return, it would have to, I don't know what it would have to be. But either way, that's my frustration a bit with it, that these things are working against each other. Like, what is it that we want, and how can we get it? Because, you know, doesn't sell at 2.4 and it drops to 1.8, and it doesn't sell, and it doesn't sell at 1.5, and it doesn't sell at, you know, 800,000, and then somebody buys it at 700,000 and then gets a business going. That's economic viability. And I hate that people have made overinvestment in it, but that's the reality.
Can I ask just quick questions? It sounded like you're sort of saying though that, but correct me if I'm wrong, that the economic viability stands alone, and it really doesn't have anything to do with the fact that it may or may not be designated as historic. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you saying?
I would say that for me, it's two separate issues. Yes.
So the neighboring property where a gentleman had come to the town wanting to build, he ran into so many hurdles and obstacles that he decided to sell and take his losses and go home. He sold it to someone for 1.4 million. That's the green shack that sits right next to the Bellum property. So it has been sitting there empty and not maintained for some time. 151 Main Street has been empty for some time. And by the way, what you did with painting it and making it look cuter with the sign and the numbers looks great. But nonetheless, it's empty. And then we tore down a building, so that's gone. And then the mattress warehouse is pretty much an empty shell that doesn't do much. And it's unfortunate, but that's reality of how much it costs. As much as I love this town and want to do something to make economic sense, if it's doesn't make economic sense, it's not a business. It doesn't work. So we can't change the economic factors, but what I'm proposing is we need to be careful not to create more complex problems to allow for economic viability to come into play.
Can I just make a comment? I think that the mattress place is in use. I think he just doesn't stay there. If you call him, he'll rush right over and show you a mattress, just for the record. It's not a an empty property. He just doesn't sit there and, sell from there, but we've called him and he will meet you and show you his collection. So just for the record, I don't think that's an empty property, but okay.
I'd like to ask a question of Madison and Michelle, and just make sure I'm thinking about this correctly. Because I'm not sure it's the historic designation that everybody fears. It's the implications that follow, right? How are they going to restrict my ability to use this property? And we don't really know that yet. And I wanted to ask if my thinking is right about this, that we've got sort of two sets of restrictions potentially. One is if they're pursuing grant money, well, then we have to go by, and in fact, the grant will end up being the guidelines for what they can and cannot do on the property. It almost takes us out of the position, and we haven't done this yet, so you guys can correct what I say that's wrong. But it takes us out of the position of deciding, whether they can add on to the building or move it or, et cetera, change the style. Or if a complementary style is okay. All that'll be governed by, my understanding is the grant will make reference to a set of guidelines that will govern, as I recall. Now, the second category is if they're not going for historic preservation credit, tax credits and other things, then I think it is truly up to us. Now, we have loosely adopted some guidelines, but we'll have a lot of discretion with that. And so is that correct? Is that a correct framing?
I would like to clarify a couple of things.
Thank you.
So in either of the two scenarios that you posed, HPC, and if they're planning to do other things with the exterior, potentially Planning Commission will have weigh in for what goes on the property.
Sure.
So y'all will still need to review it against the adopted guidelines at the current time, whether that's the Secretary of Interior's guidelines that we have currently adopted or any future design guidelines that get adopted. Y'all will need to review whatever is proposed against those guidelines. And here's kind of where it diverges. If they're going for grants, the state often has more stringent requirements for what they can and cannot do on the exterior of their property or whatever it is that they're trying to apply for a grant. They will need to hold to those stringent guidelines in order to, get money from the state or wherever it is they're applying for a grant from, whether it's federally or state funded. If they are not applying to the grant, they still have to meet with the Secretary of Interior's guidelines, but I don't believe that the town's interpretation of those guidelines is nearly as strict as the state's.
Okay.
That is my understanding, having not really had to implement this one way or the other.
Okay, well, that sound checks then. And so the Secretary of Interior guidelines will be, I understand there's Planning Commission stuff, but they'll be looking to us to say, hey, are you guys okay with this from a historic preservation perspective? And then we make some recommendation, correct? And that would be
Correct. So
with reference to the guidelines, but the guidelines aren't necessarily, we can navigate within those guidelines, right?
as long as what is proposed falls within the guidelines, certainly. For example, when the saloon came through for the certificate of appropriateness, which is the only example I have of us using this Secretary of Interior's design guidelines so far. Obviously not all 200 pages. It's a very long document. I think it's over 200 pages. Not all 200 pages was applicable to that awning of theirs being rebuilt. So we would go through and figure out what was applicable to what was being built. So does that answer your question?
Well, I think, there's some unknown here, but I guess what I want to say is that the unknown is how are we going to interpret the restrictions if it is designated historic? How are we going what's that going to look like for the owner? And, I think that has a direct bearing on economic viability. And, the projects that I worked on in Texas, like the historic Pearl Brewery, we ran right into that. And we had, for example, a beautiful, beautiful building that reminds me of 192. And it wasn't functional. You couldn't put a restaurant in it. You couldn't really use it commercially. But what we did was we said, we're not going to get any grants. We're not going to get any tax credits. And so all we were dealing with was the local historic preservation board. And what we did was we did a really beautiful job, honestly, but we created we kept the building in place, actually brought some of it back to its original, and then added on to the right side of the building. And it was beautifully done with some glass. So there was a demarcation between the historic building and the commercial add-on. So it still looks like its own jewel box. And I'm just throwing that out. I'm not throwing that out as an answer for 192 or this discussion, but I think there are creative ways to do that. And that's why I got on this commission, because I'm very interested in being very flexible. I don't want anything that's historic. I wouldn't want it demoed. I'd like to creatively try to figure out how to work with the owner so that we have something that's really inspirational at the end and still has historic authenticity. And so I'm testing. You can't really answer the question, Madison and Michelle, but I'm hoping that the interior guidelines, as we start to work with them, will give us that flexibility. Because I think that's where viability and historic preservation have to work together. And I do think they have to work together. So I just wanted to make that comment and get that context on the table as we work through this.
I might be allowed to add that
Please.
the spirit of the code that was adopted certainly hints at that effort, Ken, to preserve what Minturn has and allow Minturn to grow forward as well, with some form of economic viability to be had in the balance therein. So I think that what you hit on is really the spirit of the code that was adopted by, Madison would go into the code and discuss, the ability to have alterations to the building, the ability to add add-ons to the building, the ability to move the building should, all of that is outlined in the code and goes certainly deeper into the Secretary of State's guidelines, which I have not read. Yes, it's a very dense document, but that the spirit is to work with property owners. And if I could just finish by saying, things that Larry has brought up are very pertinent to Minturn's future. We're getting ready, just so all at looking at a potential for a downtown development authority. And how does historic preservation, play into that? And what's the economic viability in that? And so Larry brought up quite a few good points that I was at the council when Historic Preservation Commission members were selected, and just for those reasons to find that balance. Something that has come up is the value of the nomination. So there's a value in the nomination, for instance, in 155 Main Street, in knowing, are you historic or not? That tells the property owner, that tells the realtor, and that tells all the prospective buyers that they know what they're getting into. And just as valuable is knowing if you're not historic. So there's consideration as to if there's a value of just nominating everything in the downtown, because our downtown's being kind of held hostage a little bit. And maybe we just nominate it to find out what the Historic Preservation Commission and the council think of each building. Yes or no, so that property owners can move on accordingly. So just keep in mind, there's a real value in knowing, and there's a real, I think, frustration in the unknown.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. I would just add to that, though, that I think there's a little bit more nuance that we should add to that, in that it's not just the designation that adds it does add some certainty. If you're not historic, then you know what it looks like. If you are historic, though, it's still unknown because we just haven't gone through the process. And we don't know, for example, how we'll interpret how much flexibility will be available to an owner. And so I think what's really missing is an example. Like I can't wait till we get a owner of a property that's designated historic that wants to do some economic viability changes to the property, and we work with that owner, and it's a win-win success for the town, because then people will know the value of the historic designation, I think. So that's just a comment that would elaborate on tag on to Michelle's comment.
Can I add on too? I
Sure.
still just want to go back to the basics, and I firmly believe that historic preservation is economic viability in this town, because this town is not Edwards, it's not Avon, geez. It's not Vale, it's really one of maybe Redcliffe. I don't go there that much, but is one place that I believe that people come here for this reason, and they walk around, and that, in my hopeful thinking, is part of the economic viability that we have. So I just really want to say that I'm for it in this town.
Yes, and thanks Michelle for the word you used, because that's a word that's been on my mind for a long time, and that's the hostage word, right? And it may seem bold or emblazoned, but I believe it because I know the other option. So yes, it's great for us to know, is there economic viability downtown or not? I think the community is going to have to come to terms with, there may have to be another location that's the central meeting place. Like if it can't be in the natural turn, which is where everybody would want it to be, where we can have celebrations and people buzz in the streets, and there's that viability that we see on Saturdays, more than just Saturdays in the summer, then it may be on the 1500 block down here that somebody's wanting to develop a Riverwalk style thing, like is over in Edwards, right? It may be strip mall situations. That's what happens in my hometown. And that's because the downtown became unviable because people weren't interested in common commercial economic viability. I mean, the amount that properties are worth do not match the amount of sales tax that's generated. It is probably, I would love to see the numbers compared to most places of this size, and the value should return in sales tax that can fund a development district that may say, yeah, we need to set something up over here. We've got this commercial space that's kind of growing over by the barn. When that the yoga barn, when that opens up, is there a coffee shop that's going to go over there? Is that where I'm going to go get my bread? Not on this corner. Like, I think we've got a bakery coming to town if we have more people move here and all this. So this is part of, like, if it doesn't become viable in the downtown, which is the most attractive, it's going to have to happen somewhere for people to not have to drive to Avon or Vale or go to Eagle to take care of the things that they may could pay another one of their community members. Like, I would rather spend money with Larry. I'd rather spend money, with what Lynn was doing over there than go somewhere else. So that's part of what I see is where we're at with this. And yeah, knowing is going to be the difference, and we can move from there.
Are there other comments from the commissioners, or should we open it up for some public comment and discussion at this point?
I just really appreciate the open conversation that we're having right now. So thank you.
Okay. Any other questions of staff? I asked the question. Any questions from commissioners, or if not, because I was sensing that maybe we were ready for some public comment and discussion. Oh, go ahead.
Well,
Tracy.
since you asked, I'll go ahead and ask, do you see a downside to nominating this particular property? Anybody, it can be anybody.
Yeah, who's that directed to?
Um,
I would just,
There you go.
if I may, Tracy, I think if we can hear from anybody associated and their perspective on it, I think it would be in the nature of this conversation we're having to hear from them, because that may be a difference in how one of us may feel. Is that
fair enough, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, it's a great question though. Any other comments or questions? Madison, keep me on task here. I think the next item would be to open this up for public comment.
It is, yes.
Great, thank you. So, I think we have a couple of folks here. We got Lynn and Marco, who I've not met yet, but nice to meet you over Zoom.
Nice to
And
meet you.
we would invite you to the extent you'd like to make any comments at this time.
If I could mention, Marco's on a crutch. I don't know if standing is going to impede his being able to speak, or if that microphone can come while he sits.
The microphone is movable if needed to accommodate.
Yeah, I can speak.
I can
loud
certainly
if you hear
I
me.
can certainly hear you fine where you're sitting.
Okay, I'm good speaking loud.
Okay.
I get scared of microphones. But okay, I'll try loud. If you don't hear me, you just wait. Okay?
Yes, yeah, no, we can hear you. I certainly can hear you perfect, like I'm in the
Great.
room. Thank you.
State your name and where your address is.
Okay, Marco Tonazzi, I'm the owner of 151 Main. I live in Eagle, but I have owned and ran my business in the Meadow Mountain Business Park for, I want to say, between 25 and about 25 years. So I even lived in Minturn for 3 months, in between two homes. Where do I start? I like what the town and the Historic Preservation Commission is doing. I was one of the ones concerned when 151 was candidate for demolition, or the change that was in sight. Is one of the reasons why I want it, and I was able to buy it. Preserving the property. I think I heard from each and everyone here so many things that I am in full agreement, and I think there is a cohesive effort here toward the goal of preserving and protecting historically, but also the economic side and potential of town, which is, I don't think, and some of you said it, they cannot be separated. They kind of have to go together because of the identity of this town. I have had a little experience with an historic designation. With the first home I owned in Italy was designated historic because there were frescoes on the outside of the building from 1463. So that came from my family, from my mom. It came to me. I did a full remodel because the building was actually the home of all the pigeons of the entire town. So it was a major project. And at the time, the historic designation made things complicated. And when things are complicated and cumbersome, cost goes with it inherently. So I did go through, I did what I did. We remodeled 25 years later, I sold it, but the historic designation was perceived as problematic. I think the biggest issue with historic designation is the perception from owners, investors, that you're running into more problems. Probably not as many or as big as they really are. But the perception is clear. The first thing you feel is, I'm gonna get a plaque and I will not be able to change the handle on the door. That's how people feel about historic designation. So I think the first goal should be clarity, transparency in communicating what the implications are. Pete Seibert said, I don't know what to tell the potential buyer. I think that's the problem. If he were able to explain clearly the situation, whether there are advantages or disadvantages, then it would be a neutral impact. In fact, my investment in the Blue House, which has been sitting empty for a year for a reason. It's very hard to figure out a valuable business based on the level of investment. There's a problem with that? Absolutely. We all live that. It doesn't matter where you live in the Vail Valley. But it took me a year to decide and figure out what I can do within the property that is valuable from a financial standpoint. The investment doesn't justify investing and leasing out. The cost of the properties are too high. So the only option, in my view, and I'm not an expert at all, but is owner operator. And that's so you restrict the field of potential investors because it can only be that owner operator. I really think that my strong suggestion is for this commission and the town to be completely, it's not about transparency. I don't think there's anything hidden, but in communicating what the rules really are. When I bought 151 and I met with Madison, I was asking about the color of the house and little things. In my mind, I thought there were reasonable restrictions, design guidelines that I didn't see as an obstacle, simply as matter of fact. In fact, I asked before this meeting, Madison, what are the true implications of going from what I knew about 151 and what I will need to learn if the designation is completed. And you gave me a little rundown, not in detail, but my perception was, okay, I'm not buying a property that I would never think, but that I could. I heard demolition. I think that was out of the question even before any historic designation in town. I thought, I don't know the rules in detail, but I think the true issue is simply clear communication about what the restrictions are, the implications are, what the advantages are. I think you were talking about a grant or grants or tax relief. It could be a positive for an owner, but it's definitely not enough for an owner to reach out. Nobody came up to you guys as a property owner saying, I like my house. That's what I heard today. I think the perception is I will not be the one putting extra burden on me and on my property. That explains why it comes from other people. I think there is a burden, maybe, but there is definitely a perceived burden on an historic designation for a building. And that is hard to change as a perception, and there is maybe objectively some added difficulties. I'm not sure, but I think the biggest problem is the perception. You all said great things. I wish I could have made small comments to all that you said individually, but I don't recall anymore.
Okay.
Thank you.
Of course, any regarding 151 or anything that I could add to this, and I'm open to any question from you guys.
I just want to thank you for giving me like your perspective, and thank you for buying it and just telling it me because if you have that perception, you're not alone and others do too. So thank you.
I have a question for you, Marco. I heard you say you spent a year pondering what to do with it, and I realized there were benefits to buying the property with the parking that came along with it for other business entities that are going on. Could you share with us some of the ideas that you may have had, and besides not being able to rent it to someone else because it didn't seem economically viable? Did you run across any ideas that were, well, maybe, no, this is absolutely not, or what were some of the obstacles that you found when processing through different ideas? Because you have multiple businesses, and we all know that you think broadly. So thank you. That's my question.
I think the biggest question is identifying a business that is suitable to the environment, not the building, but the town, the clientele. So I'm particular about, I'm not a merchant. So I don't have any interest in buying 1 million screws and selling 1 million screws for 2 cents more and make money. I don't know. I don't want to make it bigger than it is, but to me, any person and any business is part of a community, and it has to contribute to the value of the community. So what we do in the Blue House has to improve the value of the entire community, town, Main Street area. So it was very hard for me to identify what I could do that it was valuable. And I had an interest and some knowledge about it, of course, that's the foundation. But it's because of what Minturn is, the choices are limited. I don't see that as a negative, but as a challenge. To do something that is valuable in Minturn is not easy. So I don't know if I answered the question fully, or if you want to ask me differently, but I didn't see any particular difficulty in conjunction to the particular property, 151, but how and what kind of business I could run out of there that made sense for me and fit the community and the town.
I think that's terrific. Thanks for answering that question. To elaborate, did you run any numbers on, was the structure in such condition that prohibited you from doing something that you wanted to do, but the cost might be too much? You're in the lodging business, you're also in a food market business, you're in a clothing business. You have those kinds of experiences, so that would be a follow-up question.
Well, I'm not, you all know that the Eagle River Inn was sold recently for an amount of money that, to me, from a business standpoint, was not justifiable. I am not that type of investor. I'm a operator, so there was an option. I think I spoke briefly with Madison a year ago to add a level, and I think it was within code, but the level of investment was not justified, in my opinion, from a business standpoint. So I'm a type of investor. I'm not all types of investors, and there are people that do and view things very differently. From my point of view, I had to make do with the building as it was. We did a remodel, but it was a partial remodel to make it safe from, code standpoint, from electrical to heating. There was no heating, but it was very basic remodel. And that was the extent of the investment that the type of business that could thrive in that location in Minturn could support.
Thank you.
I tried.
If I might, Marco, yeah, just echo, thank you. You're a valuable part and important part of Minturn community. And when you talked about wanting to put something there that adds to the community, it just really, I think all of us really appreciate you and appreciate that attitude. My question is, as you're thinking about it, is there anything that you envision wanting to do with the property that you're worried about historic designation restrictions might inhibit your ability to do? Yeah,
I'm not
asking you what you're going to do with the property. I'm just wondering, when you were going through all these iterations and where you've landed, do you have that concern in your mind that a designation is going to limit your ability to do what's economically viable, the conclusion you've come to?
Today, I don't have knowledge to say so. I think I do know that should I ever consider selling the property, the way historic designation is perceived today, that would not be a plus. It would be a minus. Misinformation, probably, but that's the only implication I see to the historic designation. I stop and read every plaque in every town that I am, and I think it would add to the charm of the town and of the building. But again, I go back to before when I said I don't know that there might be practical implication and additional cost, probably so, because there is a little more in the process of anything you do to an historic property, or at least from my experience and from my, again, perception, without having full knowledge, that would be the case.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't know that we need to hear it now, and maybe just for the record, for anybody out there that's listening, like if there are any ideas or thoughts that people have around variances that are novel and maybe we haven't been thinking about. I mean, all we've been basing this on is what we've seen happen in other communities, presented some of that information to town council to to consider, right? So, yeah, this is awesome that we're hearing this really from a real perspective and not the speculation. This is kind of what we've been yearning for a long time. So thank you much. And if there, I mean, you know, I never think it hurts to ask the question, is this possible? And that's how any of this gets created or any of it got created. So, yeah, I would just urge the public to share with us what variances they think may help them find viability. And through that, maybe there's some place in the middle that something can happen to encourage and increase positivity around it. So thanks for your honesty with all that.
I have a question, if I may. Would there anything that the town would consider doing for owners of historical designated properties? I don't know exactly. I'm not making a particular suggestion, but I think historic designation is in the interest of all of us, individuals, the town, but an incentive in some form would encourage owners to come forward. They perceive the difficulties, they don't see the advantages. So it's very human to say, I see problems, I don't see any advantage to this. Why go in that direction? It's a lot easier to sit on the outside and say that's an historic property, but for the owner to come forward, I don't know that there can be or not, but it could be part of the informational process. These are the negatives, if there are, or simply these are the facts. And maybe there are some positive facts that should be highlighted. Thank you for listening.
But in that regard, it might be too much for this discussion here, but there are some benefits, and we've done some work in this regard, and we've become a GLC. What's the help me out, Madison?
GLG is certified local government.
Certified local government. So we do have some ability to and could be shared with you around tax credits are available and things like that, and some grant monies for very specific things. If you were going to stick with the stringent historic character of the building, again, like I mentioned earlier, that would be a stringent set of requirements that you'd be going into because of all the strings that are attached to the money. The town does not have financial benefits, but we've been working, and some mention of this was a few moments ago by Kenneth. We've been working to look for possibly putting in some variances to add some benefits, since the town is not in a financial position to add financial benefits at this point. So there are some benefits, there are some positives, those are getting developed and can be discussed offline with staff.
And one quick note to what you said. What I hear is there are benefits, but they're so strict, so complicated. The perception again is, yes, there are benefits, but my God, do you really want to go through that?
Well, there are. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Let me let you finish. I was going to respond.
Oh, no, and again, it's a very uneducated, superficial approach, but I'm listening and I say, yeah, okay, there are grants from state or whatever, but it's a very complicated process. That's what, I get. And I think the perception is the first battle to
If that was something you wanted to investigate, I think we could put you in touch with some folks in Leadville and some other places, because we've gotten exposure to some projects where they've actually done the tax credits and things like that, and some of the grants. And so, this Madison could help connect you with some resources if you wanted to investigate what that's like. We don't have the experience, so we're talking conservatively here. So I don't want to overplay the level of restriction. We've just not gone through it yet. I will tell you, though, there are businesses that are thriving that are doing these things. So
I was just going to reiterate that I don't know how you utilize them. I'm not a tax accountant, but there are federal tax
yep.
incentives that you can receive, but I don't know all the criteria, I don't. So but they exist. I even just saw it when I just did my taxes that, and you get that plaque.
Madison, Michelle, do you guys want to add anything?
I don't have anything, no.
We've got Lynn here who'd like to speak.
Thank you, Marco, very much. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate what you're doing in town.
Well,
Okay.
thank you all. I think you're doing a great job.
Thanks, Marco.
Thank you.
If you could get up to the podium, please.
I've never played with this before. Can I start singing? Oh, it's on. Good evening. Lynn Teach, 253 Pine Street, 155 Main Street. I think there was something in that letter from Pete that didn't, I thought it said it sold. It hasn't sold.
I think he meant 151.
I think he did it.
I think he inadvertently did that. I have been in 155 for 14 years, and yes, I am closing. When the building went on the market about 8 or 9 months ago, and I saw other buildings being given 30 days to get out, I decided I'd rather be in control than to be given 30 days to pack up and figure out what I was doing. So since my current agreement with the property owners allowed for that, I was able to give them 60-day notice and deal with it. I did not really want to, but I knew that, as Marco says, when you buy something at the levels of the prices nowadays, that the rent would probably go up exorbitantly from what it has over the years. Plus the fact that I am turning 77 next month and I deserve to retire. So I just thought I'd get that out there. Meanwhile, I was at those 2 meetings with the bike shop and with the building next door, because I was in the position currently at that point running those meetings. And I heard what the people had to say and how much they loved the character of the downtown and how much they came here for that kind of thing, not to be Vail or Beaver Creek or whatever. I also am one of the people who nominated the saloon. I'm not the only one, but I am one of them. And I thank them very much for going through with that. I also own a 1897 Victorian home in another county. It is currently under contract. It is in a mixed use area. And it was a little slower in selling, but we found people who wanted it for exactly what it was, a vintage Victorian home to do a business in. And it is also on the top 25 Victorian homes in that county. They have a list that you can go and then tour around. They are possibly going to be nominated. They know that they want it. So sometimes it just takes a little longer, but it does happen. I also, through my business, collected many, many pages, which I gave you, of signatures of what do people love about Minturn. And of course, those were from the resort, the tourisms. And the people come here for historic tourism. They don't come here because we're Vail, Beaver Creek, Edwards, etc. I've said it a million times. I have been there 14 years. I know that. That doesn't mean we can't increase growth or we can't do this or we can't do that. But we have to think of taking that into effect with when we do that. As far as buyers, I have personally had buyers and realtors in my store while my store is open. I've had asked questions from them. Pete Seibert knows that. We've talked about it. He has no problem with it. And one of the first things I tell him is, you do know you may be nominated for historic preservation, depending on what you want to do with it. I let them take it from there. I send them to Madison. I send them to Scott Hunt. It's their decision. It's their money. They can say, yes, I want it, or no, I don't. In some cases, the uses they want it wouldn't have worked. You know, there's many varieties of things on that. But it's up to us to make sure they realize that. And then it is up to them to make the decision, not us. It's their money. Part of the increased cost in downtown, the little greenhouse and the lot across the street that sold for 1.4, I think he probably made some money on that lot. And that lot, I think, is about 5,000 square feet, because I know from the property cards we were given when we did the walkabout and with the historical thing, that that was about what that was. The lot next door is quite a bit larger than that, double almost. And the other part is the lot to the south of my building sold for just under $1 million. So it's like Ken says, these people are being able to get that kind of money, so they're taking that kind of money. It has really nothing to do with possibility of historical doing anything there. I'm positive about historical tourism. I mean, you've got Leadville, Idaho Springs, Pueblo, Manitou Springs, Georgetown, Buena Vista, Salida. And those are just some of them that are all very viable communities. You have to see that ability happening. We're Minturn, and then you can go to Red Cliff, and then you can go to Camp Hale, and then you can go to Leadville and Buena Vista, and you can keep on going down the line and make it a historic tourism guide. I mean, we're now a scenic tourism highway, but we could be a historical scenic tourism highway with just some real work going out there and making that happen. People come here because it's historical. I have them say it to me every single day I'm open. We love this town. And yes, I opened my store. As Marco says, you have to figure out what you're identifying yourself for and what you want. I opened it for an age group of 50 and up. I opened it for locals who couldn't afford the prices of the rest of the valley. They couldn't afford Gorsuch. I managed the men's department at Gorsuch for 9 years. I know what high prices are. So, you pick what you see, what's in front of you, and then you try to make it work for you. I was very lucky. I've lived in Minturn 41 years. I had lived here probably 30 years before I opened this store. But I had a business going for myself otherwise in other ways, more of a service oriented, doing kind of in plants and flowers, the same idea. And I was lucky. Not everybody can be that way. It's not that you may make $40 million, but if you do it right, you can make money. And I'm here tonight because I saw that the building that I am currently in is up for nomination. And I really appreciate that. And Marco's also, because the people in that room that night those were the two most important buildings that they were concerned about. And I appreciate the fact that we heard them. A lot of people in this town feel you don't hear them. We heard them. We're working at it. And as far as going after others, Michelle, now that I'm retired, maybe I'll nominate one more. And can I put my house on it? I don't know. It's old enough, but it's been changed. So do I have to wait another 50 years or? That's just to take a little bit of light here, because I would do that. I would love to do that. I really believe in it, like Tracy. So I thank you for listening. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, are there any other comments? Anybody online?
Let me check real quick. There is no one online.
Okay, so why don't we close the public comments? And then with that closed, Madison, do we go to, is there further discussion or do we take action?
If you would like to discuss it further, you certainly can. Otherwise, y'all can make a motion to recommend to the town council approval with conditions or denial.
Okay, is there any more discussion that anyone, the commissioners would like to have? Any questions they'd like to ask?
My only question is, can we combine 151 and 155 as a motion?
There,
They're different, they have to have separate hearings.
that's what I,
Given the complexity of this discussion and the breadth of the conversation that's taken place, it may be logical to have less conversation at the next application, given that, as Madison has taught me, they're almost identical
Yeah.
in quite a few ways.
Right. That's
Yeah.
why I asked.
yes, they're two technically separate applications, so I can only entertain a motion on one of them at this time.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions from commissioners? Would anybody like to?
I just want to just close the loop on that part around, you know, what's become very evident to me is, you know, what's holding us back is our lack of sales tax revenue. And, you know, what may be available for folks, what may be where we can incentivize people costs money, right? It costs resources. And until we can have that as the focus, and I know that the hard work of council and the hard work of the town employees to get there has us there. That's why we're sitting here today. And I've just implore the community to come join us, come be a part of this. Economic viability is what's going to allow Minturn to protect the investment of people that have been here forever. Like, we don't have to think about development in the future. How do we protect what people have here now? And we do that by finding and supporting ways that we can become more viable commercially. So, thank you.
Thank you. Kenneth, any other comments or questions or anybody would like to say at this point? Okay, hearing none, then go ahead.
I would just take this moment to thank Lynn for her 14 years of operating and doing what she did and the passion that she has for what she has. So you're very much appreciated in that regard.
I just want to add to that. And I really have appreciated your coming to our meetings. I don't think you've missed one. And, oh, just one. I missed one too. So thank you so much, because I really value what you have to say. So thank you. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, ditto for us, obviously. Thank you, Lynn. Any other comments, questions, statements, declarations? Okay, well, there being none, I'm looking for any motions anybody would like to make as it relates to a recommendation or denial. Or
I'd like to make a motion to approve the application for 151 Main Street, Minturn,
recommend council's approval.
or to pass to council for approval. Yes.
Yeah.
I would like to second that motion.
Okay, so just to clarify, so we're recommending to council that they approve the nomination. I think
Yes, I can restate. I'd like to make a motion to recommend to council that they approve the nomination of Main Street 151.
Thank you, Kenneth. And then do we have a second of that?
I would like to second that motion to recommend to council that they approve the nomination of 151 Main Street for historical preservation.
Okay, and all those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? There being none opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Are there any motions as it relates to 155?
We still need to technically have a public hearing on 155.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay.
Madison, keeping me out of trouble as always. So why don't we open up the public comment for 155? Well, sir, sorry, let's start with discussion of the commissioners. Is there any discussion that we would like to have as it relates to 155?
I just would like to say that I look across the street at both of those buildings and they were twin buildings at one point, and the siding is very different, the placement of the doors is very different, and I find the blue building more attractive because it's cleaned up, it looks good. I appreciate what Marco has done to it. And I hope that there are some resources from, at one point, the town did have some resources when we were trying to clean up the 100 block. But I would love to see that building actually go back to its original siding and its original front porch and how it used to look. But it's just an aesthetic comment from this member. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Larry. Any other comments or discussion by commissioners on 155? All right, at this time, we'll open it up for public comment for anybody in the room or online as it relates to 155 Main Street.
I'm going to make this short and sweet. Lynn Teach, 253 Pine Street, 155 Main. Ditto to everything I said prior.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Marco, did you have anything you wanted to add? Anybody online that has any comments? Madison?
Let me look. No one online.
Okay. All right, so we'll close public comment and we'll come back. Is there any more discussion we'd like to have?
I meant to ask one question of Marco. Did you want your property designated to be? Did you want it to be nominated to be historic, or did it matter to you?
Really, I did not know anything about the committee or preservation, historic preservation efforts. Other than very superficially, I live here, but maybe didn't read enough about it. You know, conceptually, I like the plaque and what it implies. Not the plaque itself, but those are values that are important to me, and I think they're important to the community. So I even take the potential little problems or complication in stride. And so I wouldn't have come forward because I was not aware. But I appreciate the nomination.
Thank you for answering that. One follow-up question. How do you receive information? How could we do a better job as a commission to inform the population?
Yeah, okay. I was going to say there might be a time to get into that discussion towards the end when we get into. Is there a better time to do that, Madison, or should we do that now on the agenda?
This is really the last agenda item that we have.
Hey, excuse me,
So-
Mary, why don't you just proceed then? I apologize for the interruption.
No, that's okay. I was a little bit out of line in asking. I should have waited till we had a motion and then further dialogue.
Go
But
ahead. I think now sounds like it's going to be the best time. I apologize. Go ahead, Larry.
well, I'm very concerned. I respectfully sit on this board, and I respect what the community is looking for, even though I may disagree at times. I think that making sure we have an informed public, and I see so much information going out, and I think the town does a great job. So I'm a little bit surprised that, you know, Marco was not aware of the potential or what could or could not happen, and his suggestions of clarity have really resonated with me as something that we have the responsibility of as the HPC to educate our population. So that's why I was curious of where he does get his information.
I take all the blame. I think communication is flowing. I'm guilty of reading the title and moving on to running your business and your life. Being involved in a community is not easy. It's amazing what you guys do in your positions. So I do not put. I think Madison was forthcoming, contacted me. I don't know in relation to when the thing started to the end of the process, but in advance of receiving a letter a couple of days ago with formal letter. So I recognize not only the general information that I might have missed, but the forthcoming effort to contact me personally. But even that, I could have overlooked. So in general, for all matters, I think the information is available. So I don't have any negative feedback at all. And in fact, the fact of clarity is more on the side of ignorance on my part of not having learned or tried to learn more about the process and the situation.
Well, if it's any consolation, your enthusiasm towards having your property have a plaque may encourage other folks to ask questions. So thank you for your time tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Larry, for bringing those points up. Any,
Can I just say one thing?
yes, go ahead, sure, Tracy.
It just made me think that the intangible, like, I'm really heartened to hear you speak tonight. It almost makes me want to cry because
Yeah.
like seems to me like you're exuding this like optimism for this new project that we have throughout our town. And it just brings up like the fact that I'm grateful and I'm hoping that, it's a point of pride for you too. And, you can find a lot of joy in it. And you seem like you're that type of personality that you would. And thank you, because that's really what I like seeing, that people are happy with their properties and want this and want to be part of the community. So thanks again.
100% proud.
Yes, thank you. Kenneth, were you going to add anything?
No, I have a future agenda item to add, but we can do that after this part, so.
All right, well, so let's see, I think we've closed out public comment. And so now we've had our commissioners' discussion, so we're open to any motions on 155.
Go for it, Tracy.
Well, I don't have that.
We just did,
I mean, 155.
that's what we just
I
did.
mean-
We switched into this one.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I don't have any comments, right?
Right, no, we're looking for a
I'm
motion on
excited
one.
about it. I'm excited for the
I'm happy to make.
potentiality.
Okay, Kenneth,
I'd like to make a motion to recommend to council that they approve the historic preservation nomination for 155 Main Street, Minter.
do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so none being opposed. Sorry, Tracy, did you vote?
Oh, yeah, I did.
None being opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Okay. Thank you. Thank everyone for that. That was a really actually energizing discussion. And makes me think of a couple things I want to comment on as we move further into the agenda. Do we have so let's close out the business items and move on to discussion direction items. Do we have any discussion direction items?
We do not.
Okay. Staff reports,
Don't have any of those either.
okay. Historic Preservation Commission comments. The comment that I'd like to just throw out there is just for us to all be on the lookout, including staff, for any pamphlets or something that community gives to potential buyers of property that explains, okay, here's what you're getting into. This, if this is historic, here's the implications at a really, really high level. Because we're going to continue to get this question of what's the implication. So I just wanted to make that comment. Are there any other comments, Historic Preservation Commission comments?
I have a comment. It was I was taken aback when I learned that 151 and 155 was nominated. I didn't know where it was coming from. And I feel like, I don't know what the feeling is, but I think that I would like to be made aware as a HPC member that it's going to happen if we're doing it via staff. But I'm grateful that it did happen. I think it's brought up really good conversation, and it has accomplished the goal, at least in the beginning, to get awareness going, get things moving. I do believe that when Marco said that there wasn't a lot of time that passed between learning of this and the meeting tonight, that's something that we need to consider. I really appreciate that Madison reaching out and to Marco, and I'm assuming to MR Minturn, I don't know. But just the fact that Marco came out this evening indicates that people do care. And so if we can take heed to what has been spoken tonight and come up with some clear defining direction of how to open up that dialogue, and I think that it serves all of our ambitions. So that's my comment.
And Larry, that leads into my future agenda item, or I don't know, future agenda item, but some certainly we can discuss in the future. I think we've reached a point where it would be really awesome to have some real estate on the agenda of town council, not necessarily our body. And so the idea that I have in my mind is once a quarter, every 3 months, that there's a 10-15 minute carve out in the agenda with town council, whether that's to have a public comment. I mean, obviously anybody can bring this up at any time, but a specific discussion about what's happening in the realm of historic preservation. And that may be a place where if there are properties that are coming up that we're looking to nominate from an internal perspective, that people become aware of that. Because this still goes to council, the recommendations right now, right? And so hopefully more people come, positive and negative, so we can hear all of the perspectives as these go to approval. It's great that we have the support of folks in those properties, right? But I think if we can have some dedicated time, it can start to become a little bit more on the focal point of the citizens of this community, because I think to that point, there's not a regular time that we're talking about this. It just is coming up as it comes up. And so to get some positive momentum, if that's what it's seeming like to me, is that if people read anything, it's the council or the planning and zoning thing. These ones may not have as much traction for them. And that's okay. I mean, it's a different body. So I just, whether we have a future discussion on that, or if staff has any ideas of what that might bring to light. But I do think that that's who created this. That's why we sit here, is because council believed in it, because the community believed in it. So I'd like for it to, have a little bit more prominence in the discussions on a regular basis.
If I understand correctly, I think that there definitely needs to be the bridge. I think staff serves as a great bridge between our commission and the town council. Is there a problem with any individual on the commission speaking to council?
There's no problem with that at all. Council hears from staff too much. They should hear from the leadership teams directly.
Well, and then, maybe that would be something that we divvy up and, select dates where one of us go and listen in, hear what the council has to say. I mean, quite frankly, we've got a whole new council right now. That's not the same council that put us here. So it would behoove us to understand what direction they want, and we can relay to them some of the challenges that we're faced. And so it doesn't have to be a joint meeting like we had before, but we can have representation.
Yeah, and that also brings up, and something for me, I'm glad we're on this topic, but it also would be an opportunity for us to ask for feedback. For example, I'm getting the sense that council may want us to be more proactive in our own nomination of properties, but I'm still unclear about that. And I'm unclear about what staff's marching orders are. I'm very pleased what we did tonight, but what's next? And, so I think that would be a great way for us to not only update and do the things you're talking about, but also perhaps ask a question or two to get feedback for us and make sure we're doing our job right.
So one final comment that I have on this. We have brought in experts in a few arenas. And I really appreciate Pete sending in a letter. I think that he brings about questions that we need to answer. He brings about situations much like Bert Harrington did at the last meeting that the staff quickly addressed. And I think it was fantastic how quick the response was. But we're running into a similar scenario that there should be more conversation, in my opinion, obviously, between the economic viability and the aesthetic and the historical designation, and how do we find that balance, and how do we do it collectively between our two bodies? I think that it's very relevant and very, very important, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. We kind of strayed into, but did you have a future agenda? Was there any more comments from the commissioners? We strayed into, it seemed like.
I was just gonna say, yeah, for a future item, maybe just further discussion around, how we want to plan around being at the meetings, and or is there some opportunity? So I think that's a good future agenda item, is to see what we can do to bridge the gap between what we're hearing and presentation on the council stage, because I believe that to be the biggest stage of attraction for our community. So
Yeah.
bridging that gap in the conversation.
If I could ask Madison, and let me just throw this out, and then you guys, the commissioners, fellow commissioners, can chime in. But I'm wondering if we, rather than just teeing up some discussion, if perhaps we could ask staff to come up with some recommendations of how to do that, based on the feedback and discussion that they've heard here. And we can discuss that in a future agenda, as a future agenda item. What do you guys think about that?
I'm sorry, is that directed to staff or to the other HPC members?
Everyone.
I think from what I'm hearing from him is asking y'all if it's viable for you to take what you've heard from us and come up with some suggestions of how you think we can bridge that gap, or if you think it better for us just to have it as an open agenda item that we'll talk about and we can just brainstorm that. I just don't know if this is the time for us to do that. So
Certainly. I can certainly work with Michelle, see if there are appropriate intervals, perhaps quarterly, that we could set specific. This is just going to be on the agenda. We're planning 9 months in advance that this is going to be on the agenda. And here's potentially what that would look like. So I can certainly discuss that with Michelle about council agendas.
Okay, yeah, just whatever ideas you have based on the discussion that we just had. That'd be great. So we'll have that as a future agenda item I'm hearing.
I'd
Yeah.
just like to add too, that if the council is going to do any of those like meet and greets, they do sometimes at various locations like Kirby's or the saloon. Minturn Matters, thank you. I'd be happy to like, if they're amenable to this, to being like going and attending as a commission member, if, you know, that could be like maybe just see if they're amenable to that, or, you know, to just kind of get it out there. So
Good idea. Okay,
On the agenda, when we were open to discussion, one of the concerns that I had mentioned earlier, there may be some sway in how this body is feeling, and I'm not sure how the council feels about us as HBC board members or the town staff preemptively nominating properties as opposed to going through the natural process. I heard an argument tonight towards doing it that made a lot of sense to take out the mystery. But I think in the beginning, we were like, where do we start? We're starting at the 100 block, and I felt like we'd kind of concluded that it was too arduous of a process, and let's just see how it goes. Now that we're over a year old, maybe it's time to revisit that and see what direction council would want us to go in and what we would want to do, and then what would be the appropriate way and means, because from the conversation last time, we wanted to keep it, I think, Michelle, you called it Minturn friendly, the Minturn way, or, you know, just having that cordial, friendly conversation of, you know, speaking with the property owner to say, hey, this is what is being discussed and considered. Because I think Marco's point is very real. I'm guilty of it, of taking the negative road of feeling like, hey, this could be a big problem. And if it's not, it's not. But the perception is very real. So I'd like that discussion to happen at our next meeting, if that's possible.
so I'm hearing a future agenda item being that the staff comes back with some recommendations about not just the logistics of where and when, but the you know, how we would do this. Would we get like a 10-minute slot or whatever? And then I'm also hearing that let's have some discussion about what the first couple items that we want to talk to council about are. Because that's on the top of my list as well, Larry.
Okay.
That would be number one. Does that sound right to everybody in terms of what we're asking? Okay, good. And does that sound good to you, Madison?
It does, thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other future agenda items? Okay, well, great discussion tonight. Just really want to thank Marco for your, we've said it many times tonight, just not only your participation tonight, but your participation in the community and frankly, your leadership in the community. And just really appreciate you. And Lynn, as always, we always appreciate you being here, and it adds a lot. So with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank everybody so much, and everybody have a lovely evening.